Good afternoon and welcome to the Grand Rapids Public Museum. I like to say this is our museum because the museum is funded by quite a bit of public funding and support without which we could not exist, so thank you for that. We are so pleased that you're joining us today for a very special Black History Program interview with someone very special whose family in this community has had a significant historical impact on the city of Grand Rapids. My name, as one of the co-hosts, is Mary Beth Jelks, and I am one of the vice presidents here at the museum. And I'm joined today for this interview by my co-host, my boss, CEO Dale Robertson. Dale, welcome.
Thank you, Mary Beth. I appreciate being here today and with our special guest, Lyman Parks Jr., who is a longtime volunteer with the Grand Rapids Public Museum, has served on the Grand Rapids Public Museum's Collections Committee, that entity that decides what comes into the collections that we have, which are at this point 250,000 artifacts and specimens by the most conservative count. He's also a longtime member of the City Commission-appointed Board of Art and Museum Commission. In fact, he chairs it. He also serves on our Board of Directors, and he also serves on our Board of Trustees.
Yes, and so the thing that's most important that I like to point out is not only is the person we're going to talk about today his father, who was the first African-American mayor of the city of Grand Rapids, but we're going to also delve into Lyman's background and find out how it is that he came to be so committed to this museum. So I think the thing to say to you, Lyman, first of all, is hello and welcome to this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to be with us and to talk about the illustrious heritage of your family. But before we get started on delving into that, can you just talk about your background, yourself, your upbringing, where you grew up, and something about your family, how many siblings that you grew up with?
Well, I come from a family where the head of the household was a preacher. And so we're all PKs, all the kids, and there's 6 of us now, but at the very beginning there were 9.
9 of you.
And we've lost 3. But we grew up, and we were all born in different cities.
Okay, not all here from Grand Rapids.
Not all from Grand Rapids,
okay,
but in the churches where he pastored.
Okay.
So he started in Kokomo, Indiana, and then from there to Marion, Indiana, and then from there to Richmond. And in Richmond, that's where I had my older brothers and sisters. They were born there. And then he moved to Ann Arbor. Okay. And then the last 2 of us were born
in Ann Arbor. Okay, so you were born in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and then from there we went to Detroit, and then from Detroit to Grand Rapids. And
sojourning to Grand Rapids, the whole family.
The whole family.
So you grew up then here in Grand Rapids as a young kid?
For the most part, from 5th grade on.
Okay. And so where did you guys live? Where did you go to school? Where did you go to high school? Here in Grand Rapids.
I went to Henry School, which is now, I think it's Martin Luther King Academy.
Okay, yeah.
Right on James and Logan. And they tore the old building down and built a new one.
Built a brand new one.
And that's where I went to school. And my younger sister and I, we both attended Henry. I was in the 5th grade, she was in the 4th grade. And then the rest of the family went to Central High School.
Central High.
And they had an 8th grade, 9th grade on through 12th.
Through the 12th.
And so my
they
older
went to
sister,
Central, and you went to Henry as
the
well.
3 older ones went to Central. And then the other 2 They were already out of school.
Okay,
so
they were already
They never
graduated?
lived here in Grand Rapids.
Okay, so where did you go to high school, Lyman?
I went to Central.
Okay, you also went to
Grand
Central.
Rapids Central.
And what, I like to delve into this to find out what people's interests were in high school. What was your most popular topic, and what did you think you were going to be when you were in high school?
Well, I had several things I was interested in. I liked history.
Okay.
I liked science, and I liked music.
Okay.
And I was trying to think, what is a way I combine all of that together into a career? Because I like all of that, and I don't want to be stuck doing one thing all my life.
Okay.
And so I eventually settled on architecture.
Okay.
Because architecture combines the arts, it combines
Innovation
history
and history.
innovation and history. And so it kind of puts it all together for me. Engineering was a little too sterile for what I wanted to do, so architecture sounded more appealing.
So that in high school you kind of had, were there classes in high school?
There were a few classes. I took a drafting class,
Okay.
and that was the closest to architecture that we got. We designed a home as our final project, but we did an assortment of projects from drafting a screwdriver to
Mechanical things.
mechanical things as well as architectural kinds of
So
things.
were you, at that time, many people in the community know you as a prolific musician. Were you into music at that time then?
At that time, I was quite heavily into music.
Okay,
I
playing-
started in the church
Okay, with your father?
with my father,
Okay.
and I said I wanted to take lessons, so my mom got with Edith Rambo, who was a famous
Pianist was
pianist, and her daughter actually was at Grand Valley,
here? Okay.
and one of the professors there. But she was the mother of Dr. Jones,
Okay.
who was another
Pretty historic figure,
in
African-American
Grand Rapids.
figure in Grand Rapids.
But she taught piano.
Okay.
So me and my younger sister took lessons from her. I took lessons for 3 years. And my younger sister, after 2 years, she decided
that
enough
wasn't
is
for her.
enough.
Well, did you? Okay, so you're in high school. You're obviously a bright kid, thinking already about architecture or some type of profession, technical profession like that. What year was this? Was this in the 60s? Okay, in the 70s. Okay.
I graduated in 74.
In 74. And what did you do after high school?
After high school, I left for the University of Michigan.
Yes.
Planning to go into architecture. That was my goal.
Okay.
But before you could be accepted into the School of Architecture, you had to do all the prerequisites.
Okay.
And so I was in the Literature, Science, and Arts College, fulfilling all of that.
Those requirements, and then you...
And so I got into a lot of electives, which were history of art, and fell in love with that, and took a lot of art history classes.
Okay.
And then when I got accepted into the architecture school, I did what I needed to do there in order to graduate.
With your
And I had
degree.
all these electives that I had accumulated, and I was like 3 or 4 credits short of another degree.
Oh my goodness.
So I said, well, let me just take 1 or 2 more classes and get this second degree.
So
I
you
got
had a
degree,
double major?
Double major in history of art and architecture.
Wow, I did not know that. Yeah, that's impressive. So what was your dad and your parents thinking at this time? Was your dad disappointed that you weren't interested in ministry or anything, or no?
No, my dad, in our family, even though there were, when I was growing up, 7 of us, we were all individuals.
Okay.
We all had our own
Own interest and focus. Okay.
And so he was very accepting of that.
Okay.
Even with the girls, because a lot of times the girls are kind of left out.
Mm-hmm.
But they were their own people as well.
Okay.
So he was very much supportive of all
that
of us
independence.
developing our own
passion. Well,
Yeah.
that's pretty interesting because, most parents would be wanting
No, both parents were very heavy on education.
Okay.
Because that was the key to getting a good job and opportunities and advancing yourself.
So a few more questions before we transition. When you, after you finished up at University of Michigan, again, go blue, what did you think you were going to return back to Grand Rapids, or what did you do?
Well, when I graduated, times were kind of rough as far as the economy.
Okay.
So there wasn't a lot out there.
A lot of options?
Because architecture is a profession that is very closely tied to the economy.
Okay,
when the economy
development.
When the economy is high, there's a lot of activity. And when the economy is low, things kind of cool down. So as far as in architecture, unless you're in a big, huge city, you're going to be kind of passed around.
Okay.
So I came back to Grand Rapids and ended up with Judson Jones in his practice.
Okay.
And that's kind of where I learned the bulk of
what
the
you
profession.
learned.
Right.
And so you return back to Grand Rapids, and you're in the profession. What?
And by the way, Judson Jones was the first black architect in Grand Rapids.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. Okay. Well, that's history too.
Right.
And that's another reason why it's very interesting that you chose that profession, because I can't imagine that here in Grand Rapids there were, prolific number
he was the first, and then Linda Haith, and
yes.
I, and Isaac Norris.
We're the four African American architects here.
At that time. Now there are more. There are a few more here in Grand Rapids as well now.
What would you say, Lyman, in terms of describing your upbringing, in terms of were your parents strict, your dad being a minister? I know how PKs have a bad rap, preachers' kids. They have a bad rap for being rather wild and unconventional because of that.
That was not the case.
That was not the case with you.
My mother was very organized. And in our household, we all had specific tasks that we had to do.
It's very disciplined.
Mine was the vacuum cleaner. And so that was my job every Saturday, was running the vacuum cleaner. My younger sister, hers was dusting. Okay. And she dusts.
So everybody had their assignments.
My brother, they had to take the trash out. My sister had to wash the dishes after.
So everybody had individual responsibilities.
Everyone had their responsibilities. And my mother ran a very organized household.
That is a credit for a group of 7 kids. So now you're here in Grand Rapids, and at the time, and you're in your new profession, and you're there. And over time, you basically remained in that profession and continued to...
I went from Judson Jones architecture to... I did a little time with materials testing when jobs in architecture weren't as prevalent.
Okay.
And then I went down to Kalamazoo and worked for Intercal, which was a bleacher manufacturer. Okay. And then...
But you stayed in West Michigan.
Oh, yeah. And then after that, I left. My wife had an opportunity in Mississippi to head a alternative school. Okay. And so we relocated to Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. And I worked for an architect who was into building schools. Okay. And so...
and how long were you down there?
We were there... I was there longer.
Approximately.
We had our only child there. Okay. And so we came there in the fall, and we had our child that next fall.
And this is what, in the 80s or 90s?
This was in the 90s.
90s, okay.
And then... at Christmas, we came back to Grand Rapids. We hadn't sold our home.
Okay, and you relocated back here.
She decided, because her mom and family was here, that she was going to stay. Okay. And I had to go back.
Okay, so you had to do some commuting.
So then we had to figure an exit strategy for me, but I was helping the architect I was working for, and he got rather ill and ended up in the hospital. Okay. So I couldn't leave him at that time.
So you stayed.
so I stayed, and each month we would figure out, is this a month I'm going to get to come home?
But eventually,
you
relocated.
I made it
now,
back.
were your parents still living
Oh,
at
yeah.
that time?
At that time, they were in Chicago.
Okay. Well, what would be, just a little bit of transition, what would you say, Lyman, would be some of the lessons you learned growing up from your folks?
Well, faith is probably the biggest one, that you have to have faith in order to achieve what you want. Because you have to believe that you can do it. And my dad always had a lot of faith. And he always...
Faith in God,
faith in
yourself.
God, faith in yourself. He had a lot of respect for other people.
So you learned that.
So being a good listener.
And those are some of
the
things you learn. I think it's a testament with you having a successful career to your folks, but really we wanted you here, Lyman, because so many people do not know about the great history that surrounds your father and his legacy as the first African-American mayor of the second largest city in the state of Michigan. Reverend Lyman Parks, and I'm going to transition to Dale to delve into some of that history.
Okay.
So thank you, Mary Beth. So, Lyman, let me start with maybe another personal question.
Yeah.
So typically families have one or two people that are the collectors and the holders of the family history. Is that you? Or is there another family member? Do you share it all with who's the...
If you're looking at the nuclear family,
Yeah.
it's probably me and my older sister.
And your older sister.
But our family is kind of unique.
Yeah.
My mother's family and my dad's family are both from communities that were black communities.
Okay.
Settlements. My mom comes from Indiana, from Robertson settlement, and they've been written about and discussed. My dad comes from Lyle Station settlement.
When you say settlement, excuse me, what does that reference? Settlement being an area where black
primarily people lived as a community.
Intentional.
Intentional.
Okay.
And my mom's community was a farming community. My dad's was a farming community, and they're both represented in Washington D.C.
They're
at the
both
African
chronicled.
American History and Cultural Museum.
Yeah.
And you can see pictures of them and their grandparents and all.
Interesting.
In the museum there.
Interesting.
Yeah, but we're all related to everyone in those communities.
In those settlement communities?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Lyles established the settlement in Lyle Station. They came from North Carolina when times got a little harder for black people there, and traveled to Indiana and then settled in southern Indiana in Lyle and created that community, and that's kind of how that community grew.
What time period, if you don't mind, did your family from out east travel here? Were they ex-slaves or were they slaves? Or?
I don't know.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay.
But that was like in the 1700s.
Okay. All the way back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Long time.
Yeah.
My mom had her grandfather, I think, fought in the
American Revolutionary War in 1775 and 76.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Had no idea.
Yeah.
So I'll let you get back on track.
So I'd like to ask you about your father, but also your mother, too, because marriage is a partnership.
Right.
Right? And so could you share a little bit of both about your father's background, a little bit more than you already have, and your mother's background, and
mother comes,
paint those pictures,
sure.
if you will,
She comes from Kokomo. Indiana. Her father worked in the steel mill, but he also farmed on the family farm in Atlanta, Indiana, which is where the Robertson settlement is. And she was one of 3 girls, and then she had a brother.
And so they were all participating on helping on the farm.
Right. And she kind of grew up in Kokomo, and she was the first in her family to graduate from high school.
Wow, that was a big deal.
Which was a big deal.
It was a big deal back then.
And she was a homemaker. She worked as in private home as a young lady, cooking and cleaning and doing things like that. Her mother did similar things.
So your dad, what proximity distance was it from where he grew up and your mom? Quite a ways?
Quite a ways, because she's in northern Indiana and he's in southern. And they didn't meet, they met in Kokomo. And I'll tell you the story on how they met. He was in Wilberforce,
college.
In seminary.
In seminary,
school.
which is, many people don't know that is an African-American, a lot of African-American graduated from their school.
Right. And he was still in school, but he was given the assignment that summer to preach in Wayne Chapel AME Church in Kokomo as a supply pastor.
Okay. And when he was a student or
when
after
he was
he
a
finished?
student.
Okay.
And my mom she was president of the youth group at the church.
Okay.
And he asked this lady at the church, "Who is that woman?" And she said, "Well, that's our best girl that we have." And he said, "Well, that's going to be my wife."
Really?
And she said,
what did your mom say?
"You
Probably
don't even
not.
know her yet. You haven't even met her
Those
yet."
kind of stories usually don't end well.
But
he did meet her
He
there.
did meet her, and I think it was 6 months later they announced their engagement. And a year later they were married.
Okay, so let's make sure we have the time frame correct. So your dad is at Wilberforce. This would have been when, in the 1920s, late 20s?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay, and your mother is there.
Yeah.
They meet in Kokomo.
She was 21 when they got married, I know that.
Okay, she was 21.
Yeah.
Okay, and so they get married and...
so they get married, and he finally graduates.
From Wilberforce
From
University?
Wilberforce,
Okay.
and they end up in, I think it was Marion, Indiana. Okay. And that was 3 months after the lynching of the 3 black guys there.
In Marion, Indiana. There's a famous story around that where, and I don't know, I can't remember what the story was, but I remember that there is some story, historical significance to the lynching of 3 African Americans in Marion, Indiana. So
Marion, and Dad always called Indiana the cousin of Mississippi.
In terms of
race relations.
Very bad. So
yeah.
Wow. Okay. So
but in Marion, they were having difficulty with the theaters in town, where they had to sit in the balcony as African Americans
because of Jim Crow laws. Okay.
Yeah. And so he decided, I'm going to take the choir. We're going to go down. We're going to just sing in front of those establishments.
In front of the theaters?
In front of the theaters.
Dad?
Yep. And
as a young minister?
He was a feisty person at that age. And they changed the laws there in
They
Marion.
did.
And he did the same thing in Richmond, Indiana, because they had a similar situation where blacks had to sit in the gallery. And
so they would go down and sing on the sidewalk in front of the theater?
Yeah. And
because as a matter of protest?
Yeah, and in Richmond, I think they actually protested.
Okay.
But in Marion, he said, I took the choir down and we sang, and we just kept doing that until they finally did something.
Huh.
Well, we got to get them to Grand Rapids. So your dad's pastor at a church in River Rouge.
He
as I recall.
pastored from Richmond. They went to Ann Arbor,
Yeah.
and from Ann Arbor we went to Detroit, but his church was in River Rouge.
Was in River Rouge, downriver where I'm from,
where-
and then he
yeah.
gets a call.
Then every year, you know, it was always a trying time every year in
Right.
the fall, because you go to the conference, the church conference, and as Methodist ministers, you're only assigned to the church for 1 year.
Oh, really?
And
so
so
that's why
every
the
year,
frequent move.
You have to go and hopefully get to come back, or they take you and send you somewhere else.
Okay.
So Dad was very fortunate at the churches he went to. We were in Ann Arbor 10 years, River Rouge 2 years. He was in Grand Rapids 20 years, and in Chicago 18. But when we were in River Rouge, we went to the conference. We knew we were going to leave.
This is the church conference.
Church conference. And the bishop offered him 2 positions. One was in Chicago, and one was in Grand Rapids.
Oh, man, and Reverend Parks chose Grand Rapids to come to.
No.
No.
My mother chose Grand
okay.
Rapids.
Well, that's really how it works.
Frequently how it works.
And the
Yeah.
reason my mother chose Grand Rapids is because, and Dad actually chose it too, is we were very young still.
Oh, and they went.
And going to a large city, there were many things that we would have been exposed to that they weren't ready for us to have to deal with. Grand Rapids was a small community similar to where they grew up, so it made more sense to raise us
in that kind of
environment.
Okay, so you get to Grand Rapids around what year? Was that 1966 or
66.
65?
We arrived in Grand Rapids in September, and that next summer was the riots in Detroit and Grand Rapids.
Okay, now you just referenced something I wanted to mention, Dale. You're from Detroit, so I don't know if you know that there were riots.
Correct.
They were on
Here
a
at-
smaller scale, but there
Yes,
were
but in the
riots
same
here
year, 1967.
in Grand Rapids, right?
Right. And we lived through it.
And you lived through it.
I remember the state troopers coming in
So,
and going up and down the streets.
Here in Grand Rapids.
Here in Grand Rapids.
so what year was that? So you moved here in
66.
66,
But the
and
riots were in 67.
but the riots were a year later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're in town.
In Grand Rapids here.
Father's pastoring at a church. The family's settled. But at some point, he makes the decision he's going to run for public office. So what
caused that?
What's going on? And if you can share just even within the family, because I'm this belief that when you run for office, right, it's a family decision,
Yeah.
right? So your dad's
Well, when
thinking
he
all
got
of this through, but then he makes that
Yeah.
decision. So can you paint that picture?
And before you do that, what church was he the pastor of?
First Community
First
AME.
Community AME, which
Yeah.
still exists today.
Which
It's
is-
a historic church.
Yeah.
Okay.
When he got the assignment to Grand Rapids, the people in Grand Rapids had requested a family man and someone who would get involved in the community.
Oh,
So
was
those
it.
were the two
Was that
things
because of
they
all
were
the
looking-
turmoil stuff going on?
Well,
or-
yeah. Those were the things they had an older pastor before my dad.
Okay.
And he was, I think, close to retirement.
Okay.
So and the church was growing at that point. They had a lot of young people in the
Okay.
church. So they wanted someone that was
Going to be active.
active and have a family. So when he got here, he was taken around and surveyed the city. And he saw that there were very few opportunities for blacks in the city.
In terms of
In terms
educational
of-
or
in terms
employment?
of employment within the government, in terms of advancement. So based on that, and he saw that Grand Rapids was kind of a separate community. You
Talk
had,
about that a little
you had
bit.
the white side of the community and you had the black side of the community.
What was
Grand
the
Rapids
white side of the...
black community was a bit more unified back then. Integration kind of disrupted a lot of things because it made those institutions kind of have
that
to
were
work
traditionally black
and
have
separate,
to work,
have to work more together.
So when you came, I know from other historical information, like when you say separate, like on the west side, it was what, pretty heavily dominated?
It was basically Polish, Catholic on that side of town. The northeast end was basically Dutch, and then the southeast end was basically African American.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was when Dad started going around and seeing, he got with some of the pastors.
Okay.
And they decided, we'll invite you to our church and you can speak and let people get to know you. And so they couldn't do it during the day. They had to do it at night.
Oh, the white ministers.
Right.
Okay.
So he would come to their church at night. They couldn't go in the sanctuary. They had to go downstairs.
Oh.
And so they went downstairs. Yeah. But it was mostly the younger white folks that came to those meetings. And they would ask him all
to meet your dad.
Right. And they would ask him all kind of questions. And he said, if I don't know the answer, I'll get you the answer. So he was just being very honest and open and answering questions about what they had as far as not understanding the black community.
Because of all these events going on around nationally and then locally.
Yeah, because people were scared at that time. It was not a time like now. It was a
very concerning time.
Very concerning time.
Social.
Right.
They call it social upheaval, but it's.
And he felt he was more of a unifier. In fact, his campaign slogan was "Unity is our mandate," and so
that was his actual campaign.
That was his campaign slogan.
So how did he decide, back to Dale's original question, how in the world did he decide, he was only here, 6-8 months, and then he decides to run for office?
Yeah, he talked to my mother, and he had talked to the church. Some of the people in the church said, no, you can't do it because we've tried, and it's never been done. We had several people run for office. And
they never won? African American?
Right. Milo Brown was one that had run. And he never made it. And they said, you'll never get there. So Dad always loved a challenge anyway. And he was going to prove them wrong. And he was going to get to know the people in the community because that's the kind of person he is. He was one who loved people. He loved engaging with people. As a pastor, he was always...
Those qualities.
He loved conversation and he was going to make change. And he knew that change needed to happen. And so he went around, he went to coffees in different homes and got to meet a lot of the people who were, quote, on the other side, and they got more comfortable with him.
I read somewhere, that he ran against, there was a whole bunch of people running for that seat.
That was when he was mayor.
Oh, when he was mayor. Yeah. Okay. But first as a city commissioner.
But first as a city commissioner. And the guy that ran against him, he didn't even campaign because he thought he would be elected.
Was he white?
He was white.
Okay.
And he thought he would be elected.
Okay. Because you got this newcomer who's just been here 6-8 months.
And so he was shocked when Dad actually won that election and became...
What was that like?
That was exciting. It was exciting because it wasn't something that we thought would happen. I mean, we wanted it to happen, but we didn't know if it would happen. But it was exciting when it did. Because we had gone, prior to his running, we went to the open housing march. We did that.
The march.
Right, I participated in that, where they were redlining in Grand Rapids. You can only live in certain areas.
There's been a lot of documentation now about the redlining problem here in Grand Rapids, how people were excluded through legal deeds, restricted covenants.
And just not even being made aware, that you could live here. Even to this day, though it's not redlining, I had people who come into the city and they're living on the northwest side of town, up by Lake Michigan Drive, And they're wondering, how did I get here when I could have lived over here?
In
And
the
it's
city.
because the realtors never even showed them that
and
there were these other areas where you could live.
And the interesting thing is, right here, our backdrop, of course, tells the story of Auburn Hills
Right.
and the whole issue of redlining captured right here. So we have
Right.
this resource right
Yeah,
here in the
this
Grand
display
Rapids
here,
Public Museum that
Yeah.
is part of our permanent
With
display.
J.E. Adams and
Yeah.
Triplet and
Yeah.
all of them.
It's for the audience, it's a display showing a historical event occurred in the 1960s, I think.
Right, where they wanted to be developers.
There was a development that in that area was prior to this Auburn Hills development was exclusively white. And so some individuals and some homeowners, property owners pursued and got their right to develop. And so that became really the first development in a white district.
By black people.
By black people, and that's captured in the display behind us. Thanks, Dale.
Yeah.
So he wins.
He
He's
wins.
on city commission.
He's on the city commission.
And then if I remember right, there's a vacancy.
There's a vacancy.
mayor.
Mayor Bolins resigned.
Yeah.
And Dad at the time was president of the commission. So he became mayor pro tem, so to speak. And there were several votes to make him mayor,
Get him
But-
appointed into the mayor.
to get him appointed into that role as the official mayor. And each time they had the vote, it would fail.
It would fail.
It would fail.
For him to get that position.
For him to get that position, he was very frustrated by that because he was doing the job and
As mayor pro tem.
as mayor pro tem, but there were people who just weren't ready for that.
For African American
Right.
leader.
And so he had to kind of campaign with each one of them to convince them that this is the right thing to do.
So what
And
kind
so
of,
he did. And when they took the last vote, he was elected.
he was elected. Talk about the coalition, though, of support he got in the community for that. That's where I read that there were several people.
Well, Dad was a very people-oriented person. And so he was for the whole city,
No, regardless of race.
regardless of race. So whoever they were, if you needed to talk with him, he was available. He wasn't going to run from you. He was always going to be there to hear what you had to say. I remember living at home when he was the city commissioner, and the phone would ring off the wall at home.
Because people had
Because
complaints,
people had
sidewalk
issues.
complaints, probably.
They had, well, water in their basement, garbage not
About
being
city.
picked up.
Yep.
And so we would answer a lot of those calls when they would come through.
Okay.
A lot of them we would take care of ourselves. A lot of them we would have to say, well, you'll just have to wait until he comes home and we'll relay the message.
Okay.
But that was a constant. Stream.
When he, the coalition though, of people who he got to support him for that included some businessmen, right?
Right.
Such as,
Well, the Meyer family, the DeVos, I'm trying to think.
they all conversed and
Gerald Ford was a
Yeah, Gerald
supporter,
Ford was
too,
a great
if I
supporter.
recall.
at that time he was a congressman,
Member of
right?
Congress.
He was a congressman, and he and Dad had a very interesting relationship too, because Dad took him around to a lot of the black churches.
Okay.
And Ford was not as comfortable with that, but Dad said, you got to do it, and I'm going
To hear what they have to say.
to hear what they have to say, and I'm going to take you with me. I'm not going to just
Shove you there.
shove you there. I'm going to be with you.
So,
So
President,
he said,
Congressman.
they're going to scream at you, they're going to cuss at you, they're going to do all this to you, but
about the condition.
you'll get to hear what their issues are. And so they went and they did all what
This is when Gerald Ford was a congressman. Before he became president.
before he became president. And after that experience, when they got out to the car, Gerald Ford hugged my dad and said, I'm so glad
Really?
you were here with me to go through this.
Awesome.
And so from that experience, they became really good friends.
So he's appointed mayor, but then the term ends.
The
And
term
he's got to
ends.
make a decision. Is he going to run for mayor?
Of course he's going to
And-
run.
But other people run too. So he's in
That
a
was
crowded
the thing that was a
primary, right?
little-
Or
that-
an election, isn't it? So
Yeah,
that
that
I
was
think-
the thing that was a little disappointing, is there were 10 people
That's what I read.
that chose to run. And a lot of them weren't even really qualified to run as far as we were concerned. But they wanted to put their hat in because now the door had been opened.
Were there other African Americans
Oh, yeah.
running?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So it was an interesting time.
Time. What behind the scenes in terms of family? You were a teenager by then, right?
I was a teenager. I was in high school. I was always referred to as the mayor's son. But it wasn't, that didn't bother me because I was a PK. And,
Yeah,
and,
'cause that's-
so you already got trained.
and as a PK, you're in a fishbowl all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So as the mayor's kid, I was just in an aquarium
Yeah.
instead of a fishbowl.
Yeah, it wasn't a big transition for
No,
you
it
then.
really wasn't.
Okay.
The only time it was kind of humorous for me is when I would say my name, and then I would see the other person say, how do I know that name? I know that name from somewhere. And I would say, well, I would kind of, help them along a little bit, and then finally they would make
Oh,
the
your
dots.
dad's a mayor.
And they say, oh yeah, your dad must be the mayor. And so then they would make the connection. Yeah.
Did it feel like this was a historic time when your dad became the mayor? Did it feel like that, or did it just feel like, hey, my dad's just doing something?
It felt like he was doing something he loved to do.
Okay.
But it was a historic event.
Okay.
But it wasn't perceived as historic.
Okay.
It was just
Yeah.
him doing
His job or
Yeah.
doing what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
So he's in the seat now. Again, won it. He's got a full term. He's got a vision.
And by the way, at the time, the mayor's job was a part-time job. It's not full-time as it is now. The mayor gets paid $1,500 a year.
That was his pay?
That was the pay. When he was mayor, he got on the commission that changed the salary of the mayor.
Oh.
And so he upped the salary through the commission. And
Process.
Because
Compensation.
through the state, all these small towns that had mayors that were paid low salaries, they were able to raise and elevate their salaries. So now the mayor's job is something that even has more value.
More
because,
attention and value.
yeah, because it's a paid position that
So he elevated.
he elevated
helped
it,
elevate
and
that.
he made connections with people. He got the DeVosses and the Van Andels to look at the Pantland Hotel
Downtown development seemed
because
to be his
downtown was at a time when it needed redevelopment.
Okay.
And so he knew that needed to happen, and he knew the people that needed to get involved to make it happen. He knew he was going to take a hit for that too.
Working with people of commerce.
Because a lot of people were not for that. But he said, look, I will take the hit, but I need you to do this.
The investment.
So when it all came out in the open, in the headlines, he took the hit.
Well,
But the development and the progress happened.
so just backwards just a little bit, because some people may not know that the Pantland Hotel is actually the
Amway Grand.
Amway Grand now. And at the time, the Pantland had deteriorated, and which was a major hotel from the turn of the century in 1900s. But it had deteriorated and become a kind of a blind eyesore for downtown. So that turned into, with that investment, the Amway Grand
Right.
Hotel today.
That
Correct?
hotel got saved and expanded. the development across the river where the museum is and where the Ford Museum.
That paved the way for those kind of things.
It paved the way for that development, redevelopment of Monroe Center, all of that.
Was all
the Voss Place downtown, the theater, and all of that was part of that development.
Okay, so that was part of the grand plan.
And he put that blue ribbon committee together
to work out
that
concept.
Yeah.
Question that Dale and I discussed is so how would you describe his platform for his mayorship? He was going to focus on downtown. Was he going to do anything about the neighborhoods with all the social unrest and neighborhoods?
He was for housing.
Okay, better housing.
Better housing, and he helped minorities get on the fire department and the police department.
Okay.
Because there weren't
civil service.
He made City Hall a place where you could work in peace. At the time prior
to... Work in peace? I'm not sure what that means.
At the time prior to him being there, people complained about how difficult it was working at City Hall.
Oh, I see.
And when he got there, he had more of an open door policy.
Okay.
If you had an issue, you could come see him.
Okay.
And they all talked about how much nicer it was working there at City Hall.
So internally to the organization.
Right, to the organization. It was a much calmer place to be.
Work. And then out in the neighborhood focus, he worked
with
these organizations?
He worked with organizations. I remember one thing that one of the neighborhoods in the Garfield area, they had the nature center over there, and that was going to be turned into housing.
Okay.
And they didn't want that to happen, and he made sure that stayed at Nature Center. And it's still Nature Center today.
So I'd like to talk a little bit more, if we could, just about the culture that you were referencing at the change of the culture at the City Hall. So it strikes me that being a pastor, right, and just creating that culture of the church, of creating that unity, going back to even his slogan, it sounds like he was very purposeful.
Very purposeful.
About a culture within City Hall that would translate then out to the citizens. But I'm guessing he's doing the same thing, of course, at the City Commission himself. So it was throughout the entire city government.
And the church.
Because it's right, because he's still the pastor at the church, right?
So it was just a bigger audience from the church, is the way I see it. He just had a bigger audience to work with. But he was doing the same thing that he did at church.
Well, that's a great platform, really. Being a pastor of a large church, you have all the politics that you have to negotiate of members, right?
Yeah.
And you have all these various needs, and people are in different classes, economic and other classes, or educational. So you're having to kind of moderate all those sometimes conflicting perspectives.
Yeah, and Dad was a good listener. He would listen to you. He would work with compromise in order to get you to at least come to some kind of agreement and not be left hanging. And so he kind of fostered that. And he opened the door for the continuation of that because he made it so people kind of knew the blueprint on who were the people you had to have involved in order to get something done.
One question I have, like usually in situations where it doesn't matter if it's a female, the first to do anything, or African American or Latina, the first to do, or just any person who's a first, there always seems to be this struggle of needing to be perfect. Because you know that you're trailblazing the way for opportunities. And for African Americans I know who have done this, I know there's a feeling like I can't mess up. Because if I mess up, people will never elect another African American leader or another woman leader. Did your dad have any of those tensions?
No.
No.
He was a pastor.
Okay.
He knew how to work with personalities and people.
Okay.
And he mastered that at the church.
Okay. So
And
he didn't feel that pressure
so
to be perfect?
No. He knew how to work with whatever you had and help you get to where you needed to be.
So he did not feel, you don't, from your vantage point as a teenager, of course, what does a teenager know? What their parents are doing. But from your vantage point, he didn't seem to reflect the pressure of, I have to do the best job because...
No, he would do the best job. And he always instilled in us to do
But he wasn't worried
job.
about the legacy of how this is going to impact future people who want to become a mayor.
No, not even when he was working with the ones to redevelop the downtown. It was all about, we got to save the downtown. Not that
he wasn't thinking about...
No. Okay. He was worried about, this is what we need in order to make Grand Rapids a greater place and make it great for all of us.
Yeah.
So that was his focus.
So he was a true man of principle.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what guided him
all the way.
every step of the way.
Right.
So I have a few focus questions that we ginned up for you about your dad. What do you think was his top priority of what he wanted to accomplish? Yes, he wanted to move the city forward. He wanted to accomplish great things for the city. But if you could channel his energy, not necessarily as a teenager, but as his son now, as a mature man, what do you think was his, what he most wanted to see happen for Grand Rapids?
Well, he wanted to see everyone get along.
Get along.
For one. He wanted unity within the city. That was a big thing for him.
That was one of his life principles.
Yeah, instead of the fighting, the infighting and all of that, he wanted to see people be more willing to listen to one another and learn from what
another.
they hear and develop things that come out of that as things that will work for all people.
That would elevate everybody.
Right.
Lifting up everybody, no matter your race. So Lyman, what would you say is the thing, if he could look back, just knowing your dad and we'll talk a little bit about post his being the mayor, what happened after that. What would you say is the thing he felt that he maybe didn't get to do or left incomplete that he would have focused on if he had more time?
Well, I know he was the catalyst that started all the redevelopment, but he didn't get to see it through.
Okay.
And so he would have liked to have been more involved in...
To see the full fruition of that work and investment as mayor?
Yeah.
So that would take us to, he finishes up his term, and then what happens?
He goes back to the church.
He returns back to the church as a senior pastor.
Yeah, he was always a senior pastor.
During the whole time?
During the whole time. But he goes back as senior pastor. We are in Grand Rapids a little bit longer, and then he gets an assignment in Chicago.
Gets a call from the church.
And so he goes to Chicago, and he's there for 18 years. He retires, and then comes back to Grand Rapids. And
because you all are here.
Well,
or did you all go to Chicago?
No, I'm here. I have a sister here, and my brother was here, and then some nieces and nephews, and then he retires here, and then as they got older, my sister in Chicago came and got him, and they stayed there
in their senior years.
Senior years, yeah.
There have been so many accolades and commemorative things done, Dale, to celebrate Reverend Lyman Parks' great contribution at a historic time in Grand Rapids, such as the Giants Award. He's a giant among Giants Award. There's so many. But one of the more seminal reflections of how important he was to this city is a bronze statue on Monroe, right in front of City Hall. Yeah, that was put up in, what year was that?
2017.
2017. Can you talk to us about how that came to be, and were you guys contacted that they wanted to do that?
I was contacted, and Peter Secchia is the one who's involved
Is the
with
chair of that, was the
setting
chair.
up all of that. And they had said at some point they wanted to put a statue of Dad somewhere in the city. So we knew that that was something in the works.
That
we
would
just
come
didn't know
about.
when.
Okay.
And they moved it up.
The time frame?
The time frame, and said we want to do that for 2017. And so they got me in touch with the people they were working with.
The sculptor and
The sculptor and the
committee that worked on that.
And so we met with the sculptor, and the whole family was involved in that. And we met with him, gave us our input on what he had developed in a small statue about that size.
Model.
Mock-up.
Yeah.
And after looking at that and getting that to a certain point, he blew it up to the one you see out there today.
Yeah, it's a life size, and it's right in front.
And they wanted him, and this was the hard thing, they wanted him aged to the time when he was mayor.
Oh, yes.
Not to the time
as
of
an
his
older
life.
man.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of hard for a lot of my family members because they didn't remember him
Sure.
looking like that, but they remembered him the way he was when he died. So
It's a very fine. Have you seen it, Dale?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Many
Walk
times.
by it.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
right there
Right
across
there. You
in
can't-
front of City Hall.
You can't miss it.
300 Monroe Avenue.
Right.
How does that feel? So it was a big celebration event. Like hundreds of people were there when it was dedicated, right?
very hot day.
Very hot day. Yes, it was. Your mom was still living,
Yes.
wasn't she?
And she pulled the curtain.
What did she think about that?
Oh, she was very excited, very honored.
Very honored.
Yeah, my mom's a quiet, humble person, and so she was glad to be there. But she doesn't. She works more in the background,
Right. Yeah, that's what Dale said. The background.
but she pulls the strings.
So there's something very symbolic as well as actual with her pulling the strings to
Keeping
veil
this
the-
whole family.
and veil the statue.
Yeah.
But I'd like to make one last leap now. So we're here in 2023, and we've had a lot elections and a lot of things going on in the country. So if you think, as best you can, what would be Reverend Mayor Lyman Parks Sr., what message or lesson or hope or words
He would
think
say,
he might
"Get
have
it
for us today?"
together."
What would he say? What would
He
he
would say, "Get it together." This, what we're going through right now, is so undemocratic and
Yes.
so not United States of America. And he said, it will take the African American community to save America. Because what we're going through is so un-American.
Because of the divisiveness and
The divisiveness and the rhetoric, the hate, it's just
contrary to
contrary
the
to
principles.
love, unity,
Wow.
faith, everything that the church stands for.
Yeah, and when you think about it, somebody who's a trailblazer who was able to achieve what he did in his lifetime and how hard he worked to bring people together, that's a very astute observation. It is probably what he would be his sentiment. Lyman, we can't thank you enough. There is so much more. We just scratched the surface of the rich heritage of your family and legacy. We here at the museum hope to gather more information for our own collections on your father. I know most of his stuff is at the Bentley Library in Ann Arbor. But we so appreciate you taking this hour with us and just giving us a survey overview of your not only your life, but of your illustrious family life, your father as the first African-American mayor of the city. And we really thank you for your time. I think we can both say that, Dale.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I hope it gave people a little glimpse into his life.
Thank you so much. And for those of you who are viewing this interview, we want to thank you for just tuning in. We thank GRTV for recording this so that we can make it available to the whole community. We also like to mention to you that we have a lot of great things going on here at the museum. We have the Tuskegee Institute original pictures that are downstairs in the Old Town that are unique and are gifts to the museum, and they're over 100 years old that were discovered in our archives last year. We also have other great exhibits that we want you, and activities, really a lot of activities going on with kids enrollment for camps for the summer. Please check out our website. We are here to serve you. This is your museum. And we, again, just thank you for tuning in for this special presentation on Black History Month. Thank you.